going to talk about types of sentences. Let's begin. Now we're going to focus on four major types, which are simple sentences, compound sentences, complex and compound complex sentences. So I'll explain each of these with examples and details. The first one, simple sentence. A simple sentence is also known as independent clause. It's independent because it can stand alone on its own by itself, and it makes perfect sense. So it has at least subject and verb. Well, subject is a thing or person doing the action, and the verb is actually the action. So an independent clause has one subject and one verb for it to be called a clause. It's a complete thought, and it makes perfect sense. For example, I like apples. A complete thought. One simple sentence. It has a subject I and the verb like. The second example is I like apples and oranges. It's longer, but it still has a subject I and the verb like. So it is still one single independent clause, one complete thought, one simple sentence. My brother and I like apples. This time you have my brother and I being the subject for the verb like. You can have more than one, and it's called compound subject. Doesn't matter, it is still the subject, my brother and I, and you have the verb like apples, still one single independent clause. Number 4, my brother and I like apples and oranges and eat them every day. The sentence become real known now, but still my brother and I act as a subject like and eat, more than one verb, but still my brother and I like and eat them every day. It is still one independent clause that can stand by itself. It's a complete thought and makes sense by itself. One simple sentence. So what about compound sentences? Well, compound sentences, a sentence that has two independent clauses. It has two independent clauses, this time joined by a coordinator. What's a coordinator? Well, for you to remember that there is an acronym fanboys. Okay, it is for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Two independent clauses joined by this coordinator, which is always preceded by a comma. So you have a comma and then the coordinator. One independent clause, comma, coordinator, second independent clause. Let's look at these examples. I like apples and he likes oranges. You have the subject I with like and the subject he with the verb likes. So I like apples is one independent clause and he likes oranges is another independent clause. Both of them can stand on their own and makes perfect sense. And it's joined by a coordinator, and coordinators makes both these independent clauses equal. Okay, I like apples and he likes oranges. Number 2, I eat apples, but he doesn't eat apples. Subject I with verb eat, subject he with doesn't eat. I eat apples, he doesn't eat apples. Two independent clauses joined by a coordinator, but he dislikes apples, yet he ate one. Notice that we have a coordinator here and, but is it different from this one, this and, in this simple sentence? Well, I like apples and oranges. This and not is not a coordinator because oranges is not an independent clause, right? It doesn't have a subject or a verb, so this and does not work as a coordinator, and this is not a compound sentence. This, on the other hand, joins two independent clauses and therefore is a coordinator, and this makes it one single compound sentence. Then what about complex sentence? Well, complex sentence is a little bit complex. We have one independent clause, one simple sentence, but it is joined by one or more dependent clauses. It is dependent now because it cannot stand on its own. It doesn't really make sense by itself. These are joined usually by a subordinator. Subordinator makes it unequal in importance. Independent clause more important than the dependent clause. So the subordinates are although, because, since, one, after, or it could be a relative pronoun, that, which, and who. So let's look at the examples. When he came home, his mother hugged him. Okay, if you notice here, we still have subject and verb that doesn't change. But in this sentence, his mother hugged him is the independent clause because it makes sense on its own. But when he came home doesn't really make sense, and this, when he came home, is a dependent clause because it depends on this independent clause. Here, the subordinator when, the relative pronoun. When he came home is a dependent clause. His mother hugged him, independent clause. I clapped loudly when my son went up on stage. I clapped loudly, independent, when my son went up on stage, dependent, with a subordinator when. I love English, independent, because it is interesting, dependent clause. Joined with a subordinator because after she left, her parents arrived. After she left, dependent, because it doesn't make sense on its own. Her parents arrived, dependent clause. When the sentence begins with subordinator when and after, it always followed by a comma. When it's dependent clause, comma, independent clause. But when it starts with independent clause, you don't need a comma followed by the dependent clause. Alright? What about compound complex sentence? It's a mix of both compound and complex sentences. So, in what way? Well, compound complex sentence has two independent clauses, just like compound sentence, and it also has one or more dependent clauses like complex sentence. So in this sentence, you can expect to see both coordinators like when, boys, and also subordinators like also, because, since, when, and relative pronouns like that, which, who. So for example, although I like to go camping, I haven't had the time to go lately, and I haven't found anyone to go with. Which one is a dependent clause? What do you think? I haven't had the time to go lately, and I haven't found anyone to go with are the two independent clauses. And the dependent clause is although I like to go camping. So you can see that the two independent clauses have been joined by the coordinator and preceded by a comma, and dependent clause start with the subordinator although, which of course then you must have a comma. Now what about example number 2? Can you guess which ones are independent and dependent clauses? the first independent clause is we decided that the move was too violent. That's an independent clause. The second, you have a coordinator, but our children thought that we were wrong. Remember how between two commas these are like additional information. Okay, so without this it will still make sense. Our children thought that we were wrong. This is additional information. So our children thought we were wrong was actually second independent clause, and our dependent clause is actually who like to watch scary movies, with a subordinator who, a relative pronoun. So this is an example of a compound complex sentence. You have two independent clauses and one dependent clause. Okay, so in conclusion of the summary, these are the types of sentences. A simple sentence has one independent clause, that's it. A compound sentence has two independent clauses, that's it. Complex sentence has one independent clause and one and more dependent clauses. Compound complex sentence has two independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. So you have both subordinators and coordinators. Okay. Now try yourself making some exercises here.